We're grateful to be joined by Jobin Lopez and Samir Moussaez, both from EDC and both who have been champions of the Growth Catalyst program we appreciate for a number of years. The description of the program that you got this afternoon with the two of them is to delve into the shifting global political landscape of trade and the critical need to diversify revenue in supply chains. For those of you that did participate yesterday, EDC's deputy chief economist, was able to give us some insights. And if you didn't catch that, it'll be part of our broadcast feed post-event. Your ability by being here is to challenge yourself a little bit and learn from others on discovering strategies for diversification, to pinpoint new business opportunities. Think about who you include in your decision-making process to mitigate risks in global transactions and securing working capital. I think you guys might have something to share about those things. Maybe just. Just un peu, okay. This conversation, of course, is ideal for individuals at any stage. And if you listen to Charles Plant from the Narwhal Project yesterday, he commented quite maybe profoundly in saying you can be a Canadian company, but you should ignore Canada as a market and jump straight into the US or straight into a foreign market right away, which might make sense if you have a strong value proposition in that market and you've done the research on that. But what I've learned about EDC over the few years of working with them, collaborating with them, is that they're a wonderful and perhaps in this niche underutilized resource. So I'm really excited to have you guys here. Have some fun with the crowd.
Thanks so much, Pete. Excellent. Really quickly, how's everybody enjoying the day so far? Lots of good content? Good. Everybody's caffeinated, ready for a round of applause. So thank you so much for joining today. As Pete had mentioned, myself and Samir were from an organization that some of you may not be familiar with named Export Development Canada, right? Although it is important where we are because that's how we build our wisdom, experience, and credibility to help guide you through some of these principles. Really, we're here just to talk about scaling up as a whole, right? And what that means for yourself trying to take on different markets globally. Really, we're going to cover some key considerations. There's a bit of an exercise we're going to run through, which has to do with your own identification of where you may be on your exporter journey. But more importantly, we're here about critical thought. So while myself and Samir are up here, there are going to be a couple times throughout what we like to call a bit of a seminar where we're going to be asking you to participate. So please put up your hands. We're here for you to share your views with one another, right? We're going to practice that right away. So quick show of hands, how many people ever thought of exporting to the United States? Okay, keep those hands up, right? Out of those people who put their hands up, how many of you thought of exporting somewhere other than the United States? Okay, good. And of those people, who gave up because they thought it was too difficult? All right, good show of hands. Well, we're here to tell you that in a lot of ways it's not, as long as you find the support. We'll jump to the next slide. Before we run into this, quickly want to introduce myself. My name's Jobin Lopez, Regional Director here with Export Development Canada. Beside me, I have...
My name is Samir, so I am a Commercial Account Director with also EDC. Have tons of experience in helping companies going international, both here from Canada to other markets, but also across the pond as well, or the Atlantic Sea.
Perfect. So we both work at a place called Export Development Canada, and the reason why that's important to us, and the reason why it should be important to you, is because we are what is called Canada's Export Credit Agency, right? Effectively, what that means is we're trying to find all these great companies that are participating in ScaleUP Week, that are represented here and the rooms next door, and we're trying to equip them with knowledge, right? Provide advisory, right? And really demystify the opportunities that may exist, not just in the Canadian market, right? The speaker that Pete mentioned yesterday said, hey, it's great that you're a Canadian company, but sometimes the thing that takes you from a small startup to a scale-up and larger international enterprise, that opportunity may not be here in Canada, right? It's out there. We just need to find you, and we've got to find those, and we've got to connect in the middle. So EDC, we're actually here to bridge that gap for Canadian companies such as yourself. Next slide. The best way to do that is we want to kick it off with a bit of a scale-up story, right? And the great thing about this is it shows off how you could potentially take on the world with some of the supports that ourselves and our partners could reinforce. This is a recent story, and it's not an Alberta story, but it's still Western Canada. I know we had ScaleUP in Vancouver just yesterday. But there was a Vancouver company, and they did something that was unique and that they could take global. Right? And really what they did was these ultrasound scanners, right? It's easy, it's affordable, right? And they were actually saying, hey, there's a lot of opportunity here, but if we look at the mass of where we could get that critical thought, critical contracts, it's actually overseas, right? I know it's there, I just don't know where to start. So with this specific company back in 23 and 24, we helped them identify and undertake different trade missions. We helped them and identify different equity financing rounds, right? And at the end of it, we helped mitigate some of the risk that was actually present for them winning a contract overseas, right? Since to date, they've actually established regulatory clearance in a lot of different markets globally, but all it took was a great idea, right? Some management that was saying, we want to be coachable, but we want to partner with the right people, and then someone who had those connections somewhere else. It seems daunting, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. Next slide. But before we move on to that and how we can help and give you considerations as different scale-up companies, it's very important to identify who is an exporter. Samir?
So typically people think that an exporter is someone who actually sends goods over a border, be that to the US, be that to Europe or somewhere else. However, the exporter is actually quite a broader understanding. So it could be a company that does services. Services can be exported as well. I had a conversation last year with an agency placing hockey players, and we were able to look at them as Canadian exports as well. So Canadian hockey players could be exports too. So you can really broaden the way you think about an export. But then we'll look at things holistically from a supply chain perspective too. The example I always like to use is, let's say there's a company selling cans of beans to America. And that's simple, you know, it's crossing the border, it's an exporter. But they have to buy their cans from somewhere. So let's assume they're buying their cans from another Canadian company. One might say, hey, but it's a domestic contract. They're not exporting anything, but they're within the supply chain of the exporter. They're helping the exporter. Because let's say tomorrow that cans of bean company, they win a contract with Costco, for example, in the United States. And all of a sudden they have this $50, $70 million contract and they need to perform on it. They go to their supplier, and the supplier say, but we don't have the capacity to actually provide you with enough cans for you to go and put your beans in so that you can export. So they start looking in different places, different markets, maybe buying from China and so on. But what we're looking to do is to help the Canadian companies. So we will look at them as part of the supply chain. We will qualify them what we call internally as indirect exporters. And honestly, from a scale-up perspective, helping those indirect exporters, you can become an indirect exporter yourself. And sometimes, let's say, gluing yourself to an exporter can actually help you scale up the company much quicker. So when you're looking into working with international markets, it doesn't have to be that you're working with a company outside of Canada. It could be that you're working with a company in Canada that has huge export capacity or potential, and you're benefiting from their success as well, and kind of help you with theirs.
Yeah, just want to chime in there with a really maybe niche example for what we have here in Alberta. But let's say you have a technology that is energy service driven, and you work with a Schlumberger here in Alberta, right? They're going to say, hey, this is really good technology. Where can I take this globally? Right? So when you think about scale up and where you might be able to find those opportunities, yes, they could be in other markets, but also if you align yourself with some of Canada's key export advantages, you can also find a lot of success there as well.
And then the last classification to typically look at is a future exporter. Maybe you're not exporting yourself today. Maybe you're thinking about different markets. Maybe you're bidding on different projects in international places. So we will call you internally again as a future exporter. So basically what we're trying to say here is that an exporter is a much broader understanding from our point of view and from a market point of view. And even if you're not exporting today, it doesn't mean that there's no potential for EDC per se to help you out. So to give you an examples, like these are some examples that you see on the screen of who can be considered an exporter. Maybe it's a farming company whose lentils end up in international grocery stores. Maybe it's an art installation firm, or maybe it's those hockey players that I've talked about earlier. So it's really broad, and I think the key here is to be flexible in terms of thinking and way of articulating your own internal story. Do you want anything? No. Okay. But the truth is, export is not just about crossing borders. It's about crossing thresholds of growth, innovation, and resilience. So in today's masterclass, what we're going to do is we're going to explore how export can become a powerful strategy for business transformation, and not just a revenue stream. We're going to touch about business transformation in a bit, but essentially what we're trying to say here is that export doesn't only help you get additional revenue from different countries, but it helps the company become more resilient. It helps you manage better your supply chains. It helps you have a leaner organization, so that way you have the skill set that you need internally, and helps you basically with brand recognition as well.
One of the things that I love about this slide is we talk about innovate, right? When we talk about scale up, when we talk about startup, a lot of it are these fresh ideas, and maybe you're in market in your region looking for people to collaborate with, right? You may have the right idea, but the person that you want to collaborate with may not be in Alberta, and they may not be in Western Canada. So continuing to elevate the way that you think about how you want to scale your business can actually lead to the connections that you need to bring it to the next level.
So here is, we wanted to ask you a question. Why market diversification? So for your businesses and what you do, why do you think market diversification is important?
And this is one of these parts where we say, hey, crowd, put your hands up, and maybe you can participate.
Or maybe we can pick on someone.
Or maybe we can pick on someone.
No takers?
You know, that is a really good reason. And if we think about the population of Canada, right, with 35 million people, they have more people in California than we do in Canada, right? So if you think about market diversification, you can be very impactful to a smaller region and experience that upward trajectory and growth. So great point. Maybe someone else. Why were you thinking about market diversification? Do you want to expand on that? Spread the risk. I love that one, because if we think about the past 90, 120 days, a lot of Canadian exporters put all their eggs in one basket, one big red, white, and blue American basket, because they thought it was safe, right? But if you're spreading out the risk and at least thinking about, hey, where can I take my product next? Where can I evolve it next? You really are building a much more stable business platform. Maybe one more. No? All right, we'll move on.
Okay. So, but what is, in fact, trade diversification? Well, it's about what, where, and how you can scale up. So those are the biggest and the most important questions. Because, first of all, what? Are you scaling up in the same market? So let's say, again, you were doing those cans of beans. Are you scaling up in the cans of beans market? Or are you actually thinking about diversifying and adding more product lines to your business? Then the where is in terms of which country. Does it make sense from which country like you're entering to? Sometimes what is the closest and the easiest may not be the best market for your particular business. At EDC, for example, we have a big emphasis on the Indo-Pacific region, as we see a lot of growth there in the mid-market segment and a lot of increase in buyer purchasing power. So, of course, that could be a region. Sometimes we also think that, we're thinking about the more countries that you usually hear about, let's say some of the European countries, some of the United States, but maybe some of the smaller countries, some of the more developing countries could be a bit more of a lure and can give you a better markup. Again, all up to analysis. And then, of course, the how is like, what are your avenues in terms of getting to that new country or to that scale up? So it's always those questions that we ask when we're talking to the clients.
Yeah, and the thing that I love about this is when you continue to elevate how you think about scale up, right? Yes, a lot of the conversations we've had is about revenue. How can I get to that next revenue threshold? How can I win my next contract? But if you think about scale up, it's also about how are you scaling up the talent within your organization, right? How are you colliding and providing innovation? Are you scaling up from process, right? Maybe there's a process that you can learn in the European market that might apply to your bean can making business. Maybe there's additional technology that you can take from that market, right? That you can apply here in Canada. So scale up isn't always about revenue. It's also about thought, resiliency in business.
Speaking of resiliency, also a big question that people forget about is, do we have the capacity? So yeah, you sign that new contract, it looks all shiny, it looks good, but do you have the capacity to actually perform on the contract? Be that from a money perspective, be that from a technology perspective, or even from a human resources perspective. But again, this is all the conversations and the challenges that we talk about when we're talking about market diversification. But what can market diversification do for your scale up? It can increase sales, which is, I think, obvious because you're looking into a new market, you're increasing sales, and to your point, you're getting a better diversified sales stream. Because if you're relying only on one market or only on one segment, what happens if that segment goes down? And we see that here in Alberta as well in terms of oil and gas. But these days, we're having a lot of conversations with clients that are able to utilize their current technology and looking into scaling up into other areas of business. For example, I'm talking to a company that is in, historically, there's always been an OFS company, oil field services company, but now they're working on getting some rapid planters in place. So completely different field, but they had the engineers, they had the know-how, and they understood the reality that they needed to diversify. So, and one of the reasons is it gets them better stability. They were tired of those ups and downs of oil and gas, and okay, we need other markets. We have the people. Why don't we find them? And of course, when you are working on yourself, you're working on R&D, you're working on getting in those new markets, getting licenses for those new markets, or maybe even finding ways to become more competitive in those markets, it gives it back home as well. Because back home now, you're more competitive, you're better, and your competitiveness enhances as well.
So we're gonna take a quick 2 minutes, and everybody should see these sheets of paper.
If you don't have enough, we have some more.
But we're gonna take 2 minutes in yourself as part of a scale-up enterprise. Just fill out what we call this export readiness self-assessment form. It'll really help frame the back half of our discussion as we move into that. But these include some simple steps that you might take either to take on a new market or to look at different diversification within Canada and other export industries. Once you go through all 5 sections, on the back of the page, you want to tally up your score.
And again, this exercise is more of an internal understanding of where you are at in your scale-up journey from a perspective of entering new markets. So kind of a therapy session for exporters.
So, some self-reflection going on in the room. Maybe we'll give people another 30 seconds.
And the idea of this is to understand yourself better, the company, with the stage where the company is at. Because one thing we often see is that companies start looking into new markets and then forget that they don't have an aspect and in their business that will get them successfully to those new markets. So what we're trying to do here is for you to understand where you're at right now in your journey, so that you're aware of the elements that you need to maybe work a little upon.
Great, it looks like everyone is done. And we're gonna do the show of hands exercise again. So quick show of hands, who here got between 12 and 15 checks? Not yet, all right. Quick show of hands, who got between 7 and 11 checks? Okay, that's pretty good, right? We have a couple emerging exporters. And show of hands, who here is a starter exporter? So somewhere between 0 and 6. And it's not a bad thing, right? Once again, it's just a reflection of where you may be on your journey and the different risk considerations taking into some of that planning. Sometimes it is, and as Samir mentioned, really easy to get excited about a large contract that you may be winning in Hong Kong, but there are all these other considerations that you might want to think about before you start your scale up and export journey.
But maybe we can ask, first of all, the starter exporters, what is one element that was surprise to you on this list? What is something that you didn't even think about when you were looking through the list? And actually, the same question is for emerging exporters as well. So whoever wants to take the question first.
Sorry, let me, just so everyone in the room can hear you.
Typically, you're relying on a business plan, a marketing plan, a commercialization plan. I never thought you could narrow it down to an export plan.
Thank you, and that's great insight. You think about, hey, I have my business plan and maybe taking on a new market, but as part of that export plan, have I been in that market to maybe meet the customer? Do I understand the customs? Is there a particular branding that I might need to change in case I take on a contract in Texas versus in Alberta, right? What are their preferences if you deal with food, right? Do they like something salty? Do they like something more sweet? So really great insight. Yes, export plan, you need one on top of your business plan. Is there another insights that somebody might have had for them not thinking about one of these topics on the list? You won't need to shout, I can bring you a microphone.
The currency fluctuation is interesting because it's not just about what the money's doing today, it's about when you sign the contract and when you deliver the contract.
Thank you, and that's actually a very good point as well, because we forget that we might get paid in 150 days, maybe in a year, but we don't really forecast those fluctuations. And we have seen time over time again where on paper, yes, it still looks good, but when they actually sign and or like recalculate, they see that actually they lost money on the contract because they didn't take into account some of those currency fluctuations. And especially now when we're looking at the USD and the Canadian dollar exchange rate, we can see how that can be impacted too.
Great. Does anyone want to share one more insight? Right over here.
Yeah, I can yell. The non-payment issue, because you're dealing with other jurisdictions, you're getting into some very interesting legal conundrums, and those legal courts in other jurisdictions may naturally not be in your favor.
Correct. So if Bob and Judy down the road in Airdrie doesn't pay you, you can drive down and see Bob and Judy, right? You can't do that in international markets. And what's interesting is that we actually identified 3 risks here which may stop people from ever looking to do business in a market other than Canada. You won't get paid, maybe you might lose money on the contract, and I don't really have an export plan, right? What we're here to tell you at the back half of the seminar is that doesn't mean you should stop doing all export trade, right? Because there are risk considerations and ways to mitigate these risks that make it so it's still a valued endeavor, that you still make money, and still build resiliency for your scale up. So once again, when we talk about the advantages of exporting for scaling up, we're really focusing on these 4 pieces. Increased revenue and growth, enhanced competitiveness and resiliency, once again, your market diversification. But we're also gonna add in this one piece, because since you are an exporter, now you actually gain access to funding and support that purely domestic companies typically wouldn't have, right? And we're gonna chat about that in a bit. But when we think about market diversification, you can really break it down into 3 R's, right? First one is relationship. So how are you qualifying? How are you building these relationships? How are you building trust? So the second one is requirements, right? And the third one is resources. So relationships, once again, you need to be able to forge these strong connections, right? We live in an age now where it's a lot easier to be able to do that. Skype, Microsoft Teams. Actually, Skype doesn't exist anymore, so just Microsoft Teams. But how are you doing that in a meaningful and effective way? Second one, requirements. So we talked a little bit about an export plan up here. So how are you meeting a market's needs, regulatory, local laws, even culturally, right? Are you ready to take on a new market, and are you willing to put in the time to understand it? And the last one is resources. So once you make this initial investment, who do you have to either support you from a capital perspective, right? And that means different parts of the cap stack, not just debt and not just equity, right? But also on making sure that you have the personnel, the actual equipment to make sure it happens. So resources as a whole, not just financial capital. So out of those out of those 3 R's, we'll just run back one. What do you believe you are most in control of?
In your business, that is.
In your business. So we have relationships, we have resources, and we have requirements. Which one do you think you have the most control of in your scale-up business?
Relationships.
Okay, relationships, thank you. And why do you feel that way?
Relationships are something that you can control. Local laws are something you can't. Resources are something you cannot.
And I like that. And truthfully, it's the foundation of it all, because relationships, right, includes local partners, such as an EDC or such as a bank, right, or such as the people that meet in Growth Catalyst. And it's very much within your zone of control. Anybody have any other thoughts? Is it requirements?
Just one thing to add on terms of relationship as well, is that when you're entering a new market, you really need to understand that you build relationships with different cultures differently. And there are very small nuances. And for example, let's say in some cultures, you give a gift, and the gift, who receives the gift opens the gift in front of the gift bearer. In other cultures, it's the opposite. You don't do that. So like those things, simple things, you're very in control of. You just have to do your research prior to that, and that helps you build those, like doing some prior research helps you get better relationships.
Great. Does anyone feel like they have the most control over the requirements? So understanding and meeting market needs. Not so much. Great. And then resources. No? Okay, let's continue.
So we talked about things that you are in control of, but let's talk about the risks that you may face when you're going into exporting, or even when you're just scaling up. So one of the best risks, or one of the first risks, was the non-payment risk. How do you know that you're going to get paid by your customer abroad? And remember, first of all, you may be dealing with that customer for 10 years, 20 years. You're not part of their board meetings. You don't know what their current financial situation is. You don't know what's like if they're going to pay you or not next time. And trust me, the probability that you will be the last to know as a supplier is very high. Usually the bank knows first, and then the suppliers knows last. But the other question is also, from a non-payment perspective, it's not about their inability to pay. It's also the unwillingness to pay. What if they just say to you, like, oh, you're in a different country, we're not going to pay, go sue us, find international courts or whatever, or they just disappear or vanish. So it's not always about the inability, it's also about the unwillingness. The other risk is political or reputational risk. What happens if you go into a country and they have a coup and the political regime changes? What happens if a war starts? What happens if you don't know who you're dealing with, but they're in to put it very diplomatically, shady business, and that impacts your reputation negatively? How do you go about that? We talked about currency volatility, so how do you manage currency risk? And then the last one is, how do you manage logistics risk? This is also very important. When we're talking about exporting to the US, a lot of people choose US because it's very easy. You just put things on a truck and you send it over. But when it comes to overseas, do you hire a plane? Or do you get it to a port in Vancouver and then try to ship it? How do you get a ship? How do you put insurance on that? So a lot of questions. And the disruption in logistics is actually a very legitimate question from what we saw during COVID times, when logistics were hugely disrupted and people had issues getting their goods delivered. So those are the risks. But we wouldn't be bringing those risks up to scare you. We are pointing these risks out because there's ways to mitigate these risks. And this is what we're going to talk about next. You want to take it, or?
Sure. So I'll pick up the first one, which is risk of non-payment, which is what one of the gentlemen in the center table spoke about. The great thing is that if you're looking to do business in another market, or even locally, and it's a new contract, there are tools that you can use to make sure that you get paid, right? First one that we want to talk about is trade credit insurance. So really this protects you against the risk of non-payment by customers, right? Really this makes it so your business is viable even though you're trying something new. So let's talk about that new contract in Hong Kong now. You want to sign it, it's for $100,000, but deep down you say, well, if this goes sideways, I don't think my ScaleUp can survive, right? If I do this and the person doesn't want to pay me, well, I probably got to close up shop. There are tools such as trade credit insurance that can make it so you can take on these global contracts with mitigating the risk of non-payment or even sunk cost, right? Second one, I know we talked a little bit about, well, what if there's a war, or maybe there's a trade embargo, or maybe an industry loses its license to actually ship these goods overseas, right? Political risk insurance, that actually covers losses due to some of this instability, right? Markets where there may be expropriation, nationalization, maybe on the extreme side, political violence. But really, if you're investing in a particular region, if you're investing in a particular market, you can also look at political risk insurance to ensure that the downside risk won't stop the scale-up of your respective business. And then lastly, when we talk about global volatility in currency, there are multiple ways that you can hedge that, right? So you always want to put yourself in the shoes of thinking, well, if I want to lock in my return on this specific contract, how can I do that, right? Sure, I might win a little bit if the US dollar goes down and the Canadian dollar goes up, right? But for the most part, I just want to make sure that the next contract makes it so I can continue to stack my revenue, right? Thinking about your foreign exchange strategy makes it so that you can reduce a lot of these fluctuations and ensure you're locking in your profitability.
Yeah. And if you don't know where to start or who to ask the first question in terms of finding out where trade credit insurance is, or like how to get political risk insurance, well, EDC is one of the best places to start, to do this as a commercial, but you can also talk to your banker. Your banker will also be able to give you some tools. Like, for example, trade credit insurance is one tool, but then maybe selling on letter of credit terms could be another tool in terms of non-payment mitigation, risk mitigation. So talking to industry experts and your bankers, sometimes the bankers are the experts, is a good place to start.
Sorry, just gonna run back. Before we jump to the next slide, which is a bit more of an information download, any questions on these three solutions? Maybe some of you've heard of them in the past, maybe some of you've used them, but from a base case, I want to make sure that everyone's aware that these tools are available. Good? Great, let's move on.
So we talked about having an exporter plan, but when we talked about an exporter plan, we are not talking about having, a 100-page document detailing everything and all that. So like, when you're writing a business plan to ask money from an investor, it has to be detailed. When you're doing an exporting plan, if you have at least these 5 nuances that will already help you out in terms of understanding yourself and understanding the market where you're going into. So first of all, the question is choosing the right market. So it's not just about prestige. So yeah, we're selling in Europe, we're going to England, we're going to Hong Kong. But it's also understanding the accessibility. Do we have trade agreements with this country? Do we have easiness of transporting goods to this country? Do we have an understanding of business relationships? Do we have an embassy in that country? Like how easy it is to get a visa to go there? So choosing the right market is very, very important. So once you chose the right market, next step is adapting your product. So you prepare your product, meaning that you make sure that the certification is valid. You make sure that the packaging is appropriate. Even you can sometimes have to change the colors of the packaging. In some countries, white is considered a positive color. In other countries, white could be a mourning color. So you have to take into account. So is it a cultural fit? Do they like, let's say, sweet stuff, or do they like salty stuff? Do you know that, for example, a lot of the global soap manufacturers, they adapt their soaps depending on the market they're selling it to because of the quality of the water that comes out of the tap. So these type of small nuances you have to take into account when you're looking and preparing your product. Also, some people I have conversations with, if you're selling to the United States, it would be easy to come and sell to Canada as well. But from a packaging perspective, now you need to add French to the packaging in Canada. Not a lot of people would typically think about that. So you have to do your market research on it. So once you prepared your program, your product, you will look into legal and documentation. Let's say you have the right product, but do you have the IPs? If you're going to a country, how do you make sure that your proprietary technology is not going to be stolen when you start selling there? Or how are you using your Incoterms, your international commercial terms? Sometimes when people tell me that they have involved a lawyer, they may have involved a lawyer to help them set up a document, but the lawyer looks at the document from a legal perspective, not from a commercial perspective. I'll give you a good example. I worked on a case where a company came to us and said, hey, and I was not with EDC at that moment, I was actually with HSBC, and the company said that we're looking to get a big contract in Oman. 30% we're getting upfront, 50% we're getting prior to shipment, and 20% upon commissioning. So immediately at the bank, we thought, yeah, 80%, and that covers all of their costs, are paid before they lose possession of the product that they were going to ship. So we were very happy. But then I opened up the document, and I saw that one of the documents required to get a payment for the 50% was a bill of lading. Now, I'll ask a question. Why is that important? What changes in the structure since a bill of lading is required to be one of the documents to get paid? Exactly. They lose possession of their unit, which means that, yes, by the time they get paid, their good was somewhere in the ocean with no one having, or they were having zero control. Well, we involved EDC at the time, so we covered our risks. Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is that sometimes a lawyer will tell you, yes, the document looks good, perfect, but they're not looking at as a commercial expert, because from a commercial perspective, you look at things a bit differently.
Maybe I'll pick up the last two. Other things I want to consider when you think about an export plan. So logistics strategy, right? If you're shipping something, does it make more sense to go across the Atlantic, across the Pacific? If you're trucking it, right? What happens if there's delays? Are there other ways that you can get your product to that respective market and still make a profit, right? And then lastly, we like to think about risk management layers. So once again, payment protection, making sure that if you are making this investment in another market, or if you're starting up and with a brand new customer, that you want to make sure that this is a fruitful and lengthy relationship. So think about payment protection and what that means.
So now, since you have heard us speak, we had a little bit of a discussion together, we want to, first of all, leave you with two thoughts. First is, exporting is not about being perfect. You don't have to be prepared for everything, but you have to be adaptable, so you know what you're doing. So, and remember that exporting is not a sprint. You don't have to rush. It's a marathon. You take it slowly, but you go gradually forward.
And on the back end of this, once again, I just want to make sure that, yes, a lot of content that we talked through, but hopefully there are some questions in the audience and we can engage a greater discussion about maybe what your next move might be if you're looking to export, or maybe what your next move might be if you're eventually looking to export. Maybe it's linking up with a key Canadian industry, or maybe it's just reinforcing some of the relationships that you have with partners in market.
Any takers on the question of what's your next best move? No?
It could be being at ScaleUP. That's a good best move, meeting people in the room. Maybe I can just ask a general question. What do the people, business owners in the room, consensus, what do you guys feel like you're missing in order to do your first export contract or look at another market? Is it the opportunity? Maybe you don't know the opportunities across the sea or down south across the border. Or is it something here in Canada, right, that's stopping you?
Or maybe it's in the EDC contact. You have two now. So.
Just throw out almost an obvious question. 6 months ago, this probably would not have been a question at this event had it been held at that time. Should you automatically be thinking anywhere but the US at this point? Should your first choice be not south of the border? I guess there's a lot of implications depending on your product and so on, but I'm just wondering what has shifted in the last 3-4 months?
I'll pick that up. So my personal point of view, right, is that the United States is never going to go away. We share the largest unguarded border in the world, and they still make up the majority of our exports, right? But I think over the past 3 or 4 months, what that taught us is that while we do have this behemoth that's able to take all our consumer goods and all our exports, we can't only rely on them. So it's not that the United States, I believe, is going to go away or that we should stop doing business with them. It's just that we're going to do business with them. That's still going to increase, but we need to look at these other parts of the world, which may be looking for Canadian goods and services that we weren't necessarily aware of. And I think a lot of Canadian businesses, I've heard the term sleepy, I've heard the term lazy. There are the other dwarves that they've also been called. But with that, it was just a bit of a wake-up call to say, hey, I know you're a really great partner down in the States, but maybe we need to start looking east or west instead of just north and south. So the United States, if it's your export market, if it's your key market that you're thinking of, still highly encourage you go do and explore that alongside EDC. It will often be the easiest, but you can't just do that anymore. We just live in a different world.
So I'll have to speak loud again. So if I'm thinking about going into the export market, when is the best time to engage with someone at the EDC? And do you have something like an export plan template that because I hate looking at the blank page?
So the best time to engage is now, basically. We work with all companies, all sizes, and we would be able to start helping with your journey. I do compare sometimes EDC to going through a video game. You know, when you start a video game, slowly you get more tools available the more you play. So the more the company grows, the more tools will become available, even from our perspective. But the earlier you start, the earlier we're engaged, and we'll be able to provide you with the information that you require, where to go.
Yeah, I think the last thing any partner or relationship wants to do for yourself, right, is say, hey, figure out all this stuff, then come to us, because you might be spinning your wheels on something and we may know the contact or we may be able to provide some information to help you get over that hurdle. Even if it's not right at the place where we're saying, hey, business owner, scale-up owner, we're gonna export right away, right? But there are also lots of really good local programs. I mean, ScaleUp is a great way to collide with a lot of partners and a lot of like-minded entrepreneurs. But I know through Calgary Economic Development, they have the Trade Accelerator program, right? That's another program, I think it's like $500, but you can register and you get to work with other entrepreneurs on building an export plan. And often we get a lot of those companies coming to us afterwards and they say, hey, these are my 4 steps, these are my markers, how can I implement? So if you're thinking about something, you can always engage us. We just don't want you to waste your time thinking you need to do a bunch of things before you come engage us as an organization.
And then I just put up on the screen some of the resources that are available by EDC. So you can see we have the Export Help Hub, Export Webinars we put all the time. If you sign up actually to My EDC, if you Google My EDC, you will find our platform. It's a free platform for all businesses. And it's a great place to start. Even if you're looking at a different market, for example, we have our quarterly risk position analysis on different countries, where we publish EDC's standing or EDC's view of a specific country. So if you're thinking, oh, I actually have a potential, let's say in Japan, or maybe in Chad, or maybe in Nicaragua, what is EDC standing on those countries at the moment? You can go and check it out. But to Jobin's point, it's not just about us, it's also about the resources available by other organizations. So we also have here on the slide the Trade Commissioner Services, BDC, Farm Credit Canada, and other organizations that are like we partner up with in terms of providing the resources.
And that's a really good point too, because let's say all you did was you identified your export market and you said Japan, right? You may not know that there's a fall trade mission where companies from Alberta are going to Japan, right? Maybe you may not be ready, or maybe you want to go, but then we can at least inform you and you can plan to undertake something like that on behalf of your business. And when it comes to things like that, and you talk about financial support, we chatted about that a little bit earlier, ever so slightly, but now that you're an exporter, there's funding out there, there's grants that can help you move into these other markets. There are ways that EDC can help you find more capital that you didn't have access to in the past, just because you've now classified yourself as an exporter.
Any more questions?
Questions, comments? It can be about this, it can be about trade, it can be about exporting as a whole.
It can be about Oilers. Jobin likes Oilers.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh no. Oh, okay, we got a fan there, we got a fan there. We didn't, yeah. I was this close to wearing gray pants and black shoes, that would have been terrible. But no, there's no EDC uniform. There's no EDC uniform. Yeah. Great. Well, I hope everyone found the content engaging, first of all. And I hope we were all able to lift everyone's understanding on where they could possibly go with their scale-up enterprise and some of the export markets. Great thing is that oh, you have a question? Oh, okay, yes.
What's the most common question you find having to provide answers to in all of the clients you work with?
Samir, you can go first, and then I can go afterwards.
I would say working capital is the biggest question of all, because sometimes the opportunities that come overseas, they require additional investments, be that just working capital, but sometimes you need to buy more raw materials, maybe employ some more people. Some companies need to buy more equipment to produce more. So capital is the biggest question in terms of when you're going to export. At least that's what
Biggest one for myself is a lot of entrepreneurs say, hey, I'm thinking of going into this market. What do you think, right? Because they may have heard through industry or online or through their network that there's an opportunity for my gizmo in Argentina, right? The great thing about that is we have a bit more information. Entrepreneurs, you guys could spend 10 hours on Google trying to figure out if this gizmo is good in Argentina. Or, right, you can speak to us. I can refer you to the Trade Commissioner Service. If you want to go down there, we can meet you in Argentina and say, hey, is this actually a really good opportunity for you, right? So a lot of the times we have business owners say, I'm thinking about doing this. It's in this market. I've never done business in Germany, Argentina, or Spain. What do you guys think, right? And it really takes a 15 or 20-minute conversation to say, hey, EDC likes that market. Hey, we know a lot of Canadian companies that have been there. Do you want to talk to some, right? And this is the type of support we can provide. And then, away they go.
But I also would like to flip the question in terms of the question that we don't get asked enough. And I would say that one is, like, how do we get our legal documentation in place? It's like, how do we make sure that our contract is binding and actually we have a good contract? Because at the end of the day, a contract in international trade is your shield. Like if a company is a knight, that's your shield and armor. So having good contracts, having people that know how to read contracts, read them and give you advice really helps. Because sometimes we see the contracts, it's more of a handshake than a contract. and that doesn't really help a business when it's doing trade internationally.
Great. Any other questions? Great question, by the way. But yes, I hope everybody found this impactful. I hoped it helped elevate what you were thinking about when scaling up your business. You may have been thinking about going to Edmonton or to BC. Maybe now it's Houston. I'm not entirely sure. If you need contacts from Export Development Canada, that's why myself and Samir are here. But also, if you want to ask us questions that you don't want to ask in front of the class, completely understand as well. Maybe it's a bit more niche, it's a bit more nuanced, but we're going to be around in the room for the next few minutes. Simon? Yeah. But thank you for being a captivating audience. I really enjoyed spending time with you today. And once again, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach on out.